What is this?
I have a bell.
Sister what?
Pardon?
Your name is Sister what?
Yeah, what is? I've got a bell about that big, and I've got one from the Pacific Ocean, brought up from a sunken ship that's about that big. Oh, I know that, yep. They forgot to put them in my bag. Yeah, somebody packed my bag and forgot, Jenna was, and forgot to put them in. Before we start, a suggestion was made that we review last week's work because some people were away, and there are other people who are away now tonight who have already seen that. I knew they were going to be away, some of them. Some I didn't, but others I did. Before we get started, I just want to mention a friend of mine in Australia wrote a booklet, Humanistic Morals and Values Education. It's absolutely splendid. He was a student with us at the Aquinas Academy in Sydney. Vince and I were good friends, good students together. And he's dealing with what's been happening. It's a bit dated now, and he was writing an updated version when he died. But I was on a couple of broadcasts in New York City. I mentioned this and some of the content, and the people were writing in and asking, where can we get this? I sent about 3 copies out. I don't know whether I've got another one, but this one is very good. What's happening in the education world? Are you recording, Jenna?
Yeah.
No, well, don't, please. Rather you didn't record this, there's no point in it. Well, I come to think of it, it mightn't hurt, would it? No, get out to others too. Yeah, put it back on. Thanks. So, it deals with the men who are in the educational world, like Sidney Simon, who said something like this: I had to teach a curriculum, but when I closed the door, I taught my curriculum. It shows you what goes on in some of the schools. Vince Nesbitt did a lot of lecturing to teachers' education departments and things like that. A very good man. Now, the other thing I gave out was Kant, because we will be running up against Kant a few times. Now, is there a copy of that I could have?
Yes, Doctor.
Please. Kant claimed he was awoken from his dogmatic slumber. By David Hume. David Hume was an empiricist. In a way, became the extreme empiricist. There's no such thing as a human intellect, the human mind. It's all images we've got, all in the sense order. And all we have is a common image for the what are called universal concepts. Now, could you imagine having a common image with this? The Empire State Building, a needle, a running brook, a galloping horse. How could you have a common image for that? They're all called beings. All that the term being is a common image. This is the kind of thing that the empiricist philosophers went on with. It's childish. And some have called it the low water mark in English philosophy. But listen to what Kant based it on. I've got one of his works here. And Norman Kemp Smith is a very famous Kantian, made a study of Kant's works. And even he doesn't seem to have grasped the error in Kant. If you see what's on this sheet that I've got in front of you, the known, the tree, in itself is unknowable. He called that the noumenon. Kant introduced new meanings to philosophical terms, which doesn't help at all. All it does is confuse things. So the thing in itself out there is unknowable, according to Kant. What his intention was to save universal and necessary judgments from Hume's skepticism. This all happened in 1770, that Kant woke, the year Australia was discovered, the East Coast. And David Hume put out this skepticism, and Kant woke up to this and decided to try and combat a lot of it. He said Hume awakened him from his dogmatic slumber. He worked out a theory of knowledge in this manner. There's the tree out there. Now, what do I know? He got this from Descartes. This is a disaster. What do I know is the idea. Everybody knows that. The evidence is what all the English philosophers went on with, and Descartes. The idea is what we know. The idea is not what we know. I know the tree out there, not just the idea of a tree. We justify that and defend that in the part of philosophy called Epistemology, which is an extension of metaphysics, which we call Ontology, the basis of it. Now, in the mind, according to Kant, there are 12 categories, which is not mentioned here. There are 12 kind of forms, he called them. And one of them is universalizing. So in the mind is the idea. Even the term mind is unphilosophical. Really, it should say the intellect. The mind can mean the images of the imagination, can mean any darn thing. Now the knower has the idea in his mind, but what does Kant see the idea as? It's a form, in other words, one of 12 categories in the intellect, and compounded with the tree. And that's what the idea is. It's a composite. And he called that the phenomenon. It's neither the form, nor is it the tree, it's a third thing, a composite. Remind me not to eat that food again. I can't get my teeth together down at the cafeteria. Anyway, so it's a composite. It's a third term. Now, how much comes from the tree? How much comes from the mind? Oh, that's a big puzzle, thinks Kant. But the funny part is philosophers seem to have ignored the fact that there's a compositive union in Kant's teaching. There's the heart of Kant's philosophy right there. It's amazing how many books dealing with Kant I've looked at and don't seem to know that. The dean, when I was teaching at Ottawa, one day two of my graduate students were in my office and we were having a discussion, and the dean came in to give me some little message or something. And I said, Pierre, I said to the dean, would you mind talking to these two gentlemen here about Kant for a minute or two? Oh, don't mind, he said. He never mentioned this, that composite. Yet the whole of Kant's philosophy flows out of that. Yes?
Did he think the tree wasn't real because it was only in the mind?
No, he didn't think it wasn't real. We just don't know it. Now look at the consequence of this. The principle of causality, it is about the idea in the mind. The principles are about ideas. Do they apply to the trees out there? We don't know. This is Kant's teaching, Kant's philosophy. They apply to what's in here. Do they apply out there? Don't know. Therefore, we can't prove the existence of God. We can't prove the immortality of the soul. But these things are useful things to have, is the attitude. Now the preface to, I think, the second revised, no, the introduction, is it? Yes, to his preface to second edition and the introduction to the second edition. Listen to Kant's words. For it may well be that even our empirical knowledge is made up of what we receive through impressions and of what our own faculty of knowledge supplies from itself. It may be. Fancy constructing a whole philosophy based upon guesswork. It may be. Somebody else translated that from the German as, perhaps, I think, no, it wasn't perhaps, I suppose were the words, somebody else translated it. If our faculty of knowledge makes any such addition, it may be that we are not in a position to distinguish it from the raw material, in other words, from the tree, until with long practice of attention we have become skilled in separating it. No wonder the followers of Kant became idealists. Everything is an idea. What I know is ideas. So there are two ways people went. Some went and became just empiricists, kept that way, and said, all I can do is what I sense. That's all I can know. But the idealist said, I don't even know that. All I know is in here. Fairy Twinkletoes in front of me here. She is an idea in my mind. Or maybe she's an idea in Jenna's mind. Or maybe we're both ideas in her mind. No, said Hegel, we are ideas in God's mind. That's really all we are. All is ideas. You see, Kant said he sort of didn't seem to grasp the idea that existence is another idea. Hegel took it a step further. Existence is an idea. So there's nothing existing out there. That's all in my mind. That's the idealism. And up to the First World War, every university, including Catholic universities very often, they taught this idealism. And of course, it got us nowhere. But what brought us out of that? Out of Hegel's idea? A bullet in the backside in the Second World War, the First World War rather. Freudian talk about, there's something in the subconscious. So there's something outside our subconscious, our conscious. Something beyond the conscious. This became very popular. And as one man said, where did that catch on, Freudianism? Nowhere except in North America. He's gathering remarks in The Permissive Society, Boris Sokolov. He says that it caught on in the drawing rooms by the pseudo-intellectuals. Who does he mean, the pseudo-intellectuals? Radio announcers, teachers, school teachers, people like that, newspaper reporters. They all spread this knowledge of the unconscious or subconscious, which they... In other words, there's something beyond the idea. Now that took us away from idealism. The third thing was, it became popular. Well, I've seen my psychiatrist. Have you seen yours lately? Etc., etc. And,
So this, just to boil it for me, he's saying you can't know the thing as such.
Kant, yes.
Yes.
The
Okay.
Ding an sich, the thing in itself. And the one thing, a side remark, by the way, about the German philosophers. German philosophers themselves, when they read each other, they can't understand what the other fellow's saying. Very often, the paragraphs, and I've seen this, the paragraphs are so long, they might go right down a page and over the page, and it doesn't know what the heck he meant to say when he started out, but he's finished up saying it. What did he mean? He doesn't know, but he had an idea he had to say something. Apparently the German philosophers are very scathing about German philosophers. However, so those three things knocked Hegelian philosophy. One is the first one was what? The First World War. You get a bullet in the rear end and try and tell somebody that's just an idea in their mind. Now, I can remember somebody that I knew years ago suffering from toothache. And their aunt was a Christian Scientist. I was always telling them, it's all in your mind. No, there's nothing out. Don't worry about that. Just forget it, the toothache. Well, my friends, I had toothache up to last weekend, and the dentist was trying to find out which tooth it is. But by heaven, it wasn't in my mind, I can assure you. If you'd have told me that, I'd have punched you in the nose. So, we've got to become skilled at separating the tree from the idea of the tree, according to Kant. How are you going to do it? Beats me. Somewhere over here he had something else startling to say, but it's a compositive union. And the clearest exposition of that I have ever heard of, and others claim the same, was from Father Austin Woodbury. They said he could teach the theory of knowledge to the fence. And remember, one of the greatest problems in philosophy is the problem of the universal. There are three great problems in philosophy. The problem of the universal, which is reduced to theory of knowledge, and that's reducible to potency and act. For years I've wanted to write a paper on that, and it says it all. It's the heart of philosophy. I'm going to send you out, when we start the Epistemology section, I'm going to send you out a diagram, a page or two, which summarizes, I got this from Woodbury, of course, a summary of all the philosophers, the great philosophers, and their reaction to the universal. In other words, can we know the natures of things? That's what we're talking about. Universals express the natures of things. For instance, a student came up to me when I was teaching in Australia. He said, we can't really define a man, can we? He said, all I can say is, that is a man. Well, that's a good definition. I said, a good definition of definition. That's what you've really done. You've defined a definition. Definition is this, that you indicate by pointing to somebody what a man is. And it assumes you know the nature of man. So, can we know the natures of anything? Who knows what justice is? That's one of the big things bothering men today. Who can say what justice is in practice, for instance? That's reducible to the theory of knowledge. But they don't have the theory of knowledge. So many people have what I think is a decadent theory of knowledge. And that is reducible to and explained by potency and act. Aristotle saw this, just as one little side issue. Aristotle saw this, that when the human intellect doesn't from itself know what a tree is, it can be in possession of a tree, it can be in possession of stone, it can be in possession of a cow, it can be in possession of the truth of justice. On account of this, that it has none of them in itself, the intellect isn't any of them in itself, it's only potential towards them all. Therefore, it has none of them in its nature. He said, we can know all bodies, therefore it is no body itself. Now Woodbury has beautifully laid this out. It's unique, the way he's laid it out. I've never seen anywhere anybody that can lay it out like he has.
How does this work for people with sense deprivation? If you're deaf or blind, is this the same or does it work the same?
It doesn't work for them. Like people say, what about to me when I say they don't recognize man as the measure of morality? Well, I can't help it if they're wrong. Not my fault. But if they're deprived of something, well, just all I can say is, well, bad luck, chum. I mean, it's a pitiful thing, and I would pity them. But I can't change the theory of knowledge because of somebody who doesn't have sense perception of some kind. So that's where, as soon as you say this, listen to what a dean said to me at Niagara University. This is what we call post-tenure performance evaluation. And a bit of idiocy introduced into universities. When I was at Ottawa, we were all laughing at that. When I got to Niagara, it quickly became true. Dr. Bonner had to go through it. I had to go through it. We all had to go through it. So I'm facing the dean and the vice president alone in his office. And the dean, a woman, psychologist, so-called, said, suddenly, do you think you have the truth? I said, nobody holds all truth, something like that. But what do you mean by truth? Oh, I know what this is, I said. I didn't get an answer. What do you mean? Didn't get an answer. I know this refers to abortion, doesn't it? Because I was leader of the pro-life group on campus, the faculty moderator, and had a good bunch of students working with me, and was conducting the International Mother's Day Walk for Life, and I knew there was bigotry there. So this is what the Vice President said. He said, I know where I stand on abortion. Deep down in my heart, I know where I stand on abortion, but I don't thrust it down people's throats. That's what they call teaching the truth, thrusting down people's throats. We didn't thrust anything down people's throats. The students, 2 or 3 times, the first time I just walked out of it, when I saw I was coming into conflict with the campus ministry, believe it or not, because I was leading the pro-life group. But by request of the students, I came back again. But anyway, that's another question. The point is, do you think you have the truth? Today, if you claim you've got any truths, universal natures of things, universal nature, for instance, of man, rational animal, but that definition doesn't take into account this one, this one, this one, this one, or this one. They're the individual differences. But the universal always expresses the universal natures of things. And today, of course, if you say you have a truth, you've got the truth, you're a dogmatist or something else. Never mind the evidence, they don't want that. So that came from Kant, say, first of all, Catholic Descartes and Protestant Kant are the originators, really, in their teachings of atheism in the world today. It has been questioned whether Descartes died a Catholic or not. I don't know. It's ever been settled. Do you know, Dr. Bonnet? No.
I heard that he was always about that.
Yes. Well, he's certainly, his teaching wasn't. Now, remember, philosophy is not Catholic, Protestant, or anything else. But all I'm just saying, how good men can go wrong too. That's all I'm saying. And Descartes certainly went wrong. Blondel, a good Catholic, but he's gone wrong in his existentialist type of philosophy. And other men like Nietzsche, well, God forbid I use the words that should be used about that poor soul. Anyway, there's Kant, and that's what happens. There's the origins of atheism. We can't know if the principles of reason apply to things out there. Therefore, we cannot know the principle of causality. Therefore, we cannot prove the existence of God. I'll be dealing with that later. But for some reason, a number of reasons, I thought I'd bring that up tonight and give you that diagram, which I found a bunch of them today. That's why I'm doing this tonight. I found a bunch of them amongst my papers. I thought, oh, I'm taking them to the class with me tonight. I can't resist that. So many do not seem to grasp the error of Kant. And I'd say even men like Kemp Smith don't grasp it, the importance of it. Because in some of the works written for students, they leave out those words. Yet they're absolutely essential to the whole core of his philosophy. So, what I suggest now, we get back to what we're dealing with last class with stuff. So, if you would just open up your pages to about, I think it was number 100, if I remember correctly. 100, 100, about there anyway. All the... something like that. Oh dear, just find it in a second. We saw the 5 ways of arriving at the existence of God, knowledge of the existence of God. 5 ways. We saw technical ones, and we saw the others. Now, the immediate conclusion of these 5 ways, the immediate conclusion would lead us to think there are 5 different gods, possibly. We arrive at an unmoved mover, an uncaused cause, and so on. I think we get on to page 108. That's where I should be. But you notice what I said last week, that on page 107, the proofs as outlined by St. Thomas look rather simplistic and have been held up to ridicule by many modern and contemporary philosophers who fail to understand potency in act, missed the whole point altogether. And frankly, their criticisms are rather juvenile, to say the least. They were so well known, these proofs, in St. Thomas's time in the 13th century, that he didn't need to elaborate them. There's a famous story, I think it was told about Cajetan and John of St. No, it couldn't have been John of St. Thomas, it might have been Banyes. I've forgotten who the 2 philosophers were. And one said a certain problem has occupied his mind for some time. And the other one made a comment and tried to explain to him what the thing meant, whatever it was, I've forgotten now. But in any case, he had to apologize to the other man because he set this problem out in about a page and a half. He apologized for being very verbose. But if he wrote it for me, he'd have to write 100 pages. But here are 2 great minds, and they're commenting. One is commenting on his need to elaborate with a page and a half. So great minds wrote to each other. So St. Thomas, in setting out the proofs, set them out in a very succinct manner, because he knew the people he was writing for would understand them, had a good background in philosophy. Remember what I said last time, I think it was, that in the Middle Ages, there were only 3 things taught to men. That's all up to the age of 16. And that was in Latin. And then after that, they then launched into 4, that was called the trivium. Then the next one, the quadrivium, they had 4 subjects they studied. Dorothy Sayers wrote a beautiful little work on that. I have copies somewhere. It's well worth reading. They prepared the mind first, then they studied. Well, now they just jump into things without any preparation at all. Kids of 17, maybe 18 at the most, going to the University of Sydney, for instance, would study ethics, and they'd jump straight into things like capital punishment. No preparation, no principle study. It was notoriously funny. We used to ridicule it in Sydney. And Sydney University is a splendid university, very big, with colleges of, or faculties rather, of engineering and veterinary science, and a whole farm in the university, etc. And advanced stuff in languages and archaeology. But when it comes to philosophy, forget it. Professor John Anderson was very famous for his antagonism to reality. So on page 108, the immediate term of the 5 ways, they concluded, say, that there's an unmoved mover. And lots of men have asked, is that God? Is that the Christian God, the same thing? See, they jump into problems like that without first understanding the proof, without understanding the nature of God, which the proof reveals somewhat. When I say the nature of God, it reveals that, say, that much compared with the whole universe. Just bears a glimpse. So, the first thing you've got to understand is it arrive at 5 gods or 1 God. So, I took the passage from St. Thomas, the article, on the unity of God. And of course, St. Thomas, when he starts out, he raises the objections, first of all, which, by the way, I don't think I included here, and I don't know why. I think they were not quite as germane to our course as it might first sound. But he always puts, after putting the objections, he puts on the contrary, opposite to what he had said before. And here he gives some great authority, such as the biblical source. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Now he gets into philosophy. I answer that. Now he gives his own teaching. And he explains from God's simplicity. And you already have arrived at his simplicity. That he's not composite, for instance, as the first mover. There's no compositive union in God. In other words, we must arrive at something which is not composed of potency and act, which itself would need movement from potency to act. And nothing can make itself move from potency to act. It has to be something moves it from potency to act. So there's the first thing, God's simplicity. Secondly, the infinity of his perfections. If he's infinitely perfect and infinitely unmoved, he's the ultimate mover, then he is the one person, the one God. He's a simple person, infinite simplicity. So if there were more than one God, what perfections would they each have? What's the distinguishing character? If there are 2, how's this one different from that? The trouble is we're moved too easily by imagination, and we think spatially. Oh, there's a God there and a God there. What's there? Don't think of space as something as stretched out. A student brought up an objection to me once in class, and I said, so you think that space is stretched out nothingness, do you? That's an absurd concept, to be stretched out nothingness. So, the infinity of his perfection show there can only be one God. Because if he was not infinite, or if there are two gods, then how's the difference? One's infinite in this, and the other's infinite in that. But it's not infinite if it's lacking something. But the proofs lead us to his infinity. Thirdly, from the unity of the world. Diverse things are not from themselves united, but if they're found to be united, then there's some one cause of their unity. So it all comes back to this. Gods are called many by the error of some who worshipped many deities, thinking as they did that the planets and other stars were gods. Look at the Caesars of Rome, in other words, the emperors. They all quickly became gods when they got into their position of being emperor. So I think you could read that through for yourselves, my friends, and let me know if you have any difficulty. But now, oh, sorry, yes.
None of the proofs said anything about God as the highest form of intellect.
Yeah, it comes into other parts. Yes, it comes out.
Inferred? Or
Pardon?
it's inferred?
When you say inferred, you know what that means, don't you? That's a conclusion. Reasoning to a conclusion, that's what infer means. So, yes, it's reason to a conclusion, yes. But you see, anything which is non-material is automatically intellectual. Spirit is automatically self-reflective and intellectual. Matter is the inhibitor to reason. That's why plants can't think. They're so gross. Stones can't think. Karl Marx thought they could. According to Marxian teaching, matter's the reason of knowledge, according to Marx. Our minds are made of matter because they can know matter. That's Karl Marx. But if something has no matter in it, then it's perfectly self-knowable. And God is the ultimate in that. And we'll be dealing with that shortly. We'll come to that in the text there. So through the medium of those immediate conclusions, what comes up is that God is all these other things. Now, if you look over on page 110, strictly, I made a little boo-boo here. That should come back. Those two should be occupy or be replaceable. They should replace each other. They're in page 108. I'm sorry, 109. Nature of God. God's nature. Everything other than man is composed of potency and act. If it wasn't, then they'd be God. There's a beautiful book, Philosophia Christiana, I think it's called. I've forgotten now. I've got it at home. You don't hear it much, but it's a beautiful work. He divides all of reality into either pure act or potency and act. There can't be pure potency. That's pure nothingness, pure canniness. But potency and act. And he... forgotten the point I was making there now. Forgive me for that. Oh yes, here we are. Everything other than God, they are composed of potency and act. If they were pure act, then they'd be God. They'd be unique. Well, there is one that is unique, and that's God himself. So everything other than God undergoes movement, going up the left there. And from this we deduce, as we saw in the proofs, that there's an immovable movent, immovable mover, if you like. A movent is something that is moving. For instance, we say a locomotive. That means something that can move from place to place. But a locomovent is something that does move from place to place. Not merely can, but does. That's the great part of studying under a man who's a very great Latinist. Extraordinary man, that was Woodbury. He was a theologian, first-class theologian, and a philosopher. A little thing, for instance, he taught in keeping with, can't think of his name. I have his books at home with this all set out. De la Taille, Maurice de la Taille, in keeping. Where's the sacrifice in the Mass? Where's the sacrifice? A friend of mine said, what's all this talk about killing? The Mass is a supper, that's what the Mass is. Yeah, I said, still. It's the same sacrifice as on Calvary, had in another manner. Woodbury and Maurice de la Taille taught that. In other words, just as that tree out there is not in my head, it might be sprouting up 60 feet tall or something, it's the same tree in my mind, in my imagination and my intellect, but had in another manner. Likewise, in the Mass, it's the same sacrifice as on Calvary, but had in another manner. A manner we can all participate in through Holy Communion. So, coming back to our problem here, it's an immovable movent. Now, also, everything other than God, excuse me, is caused to cause. Can't cause itself. Therefore, we conclude there's an uncaused cause. So we reason from them that there's something that's pure actuality. At the bottom, we're talking about something composed of potency and act, requires that something be a pure act, subsistent be. In other words, his very substance is a be. He is. And by the way, I've mentioned this before. We'll see later. There's a text I've got in here for you. I got it out of a book, the translation, to help me with the translation, to save you a lot of time. And in it, they talk about God's being. And part of it I couldn't understand. I went to the Latin. Sure enough, it's esse. God's be, not God's being. So God's be, pure act. Grazie tanto. And mercy buckets too. So subsistent be. His whole substance is be. Be, what he is and how he is are identical. Pure act of isiness. So he's these things. He's an immovable movent, therefore he's pure act. There's no potency in him. He's an uncaused cause, therefore he's pure act. And what's the purest of acts? What's the most ultimate act? To be. He's a contingent being, therefore we conclude from that, a necessary being. He is perfect by participation. These are the first, second, third, fourth ways of proving the existence of God. So he's perfect by participation. From that we conclude a being perfect by essence. The perfection's right in his very being. He's ordered, things are ordered to their ends, so there must exist an unordered orderer, and therefore it's not composite of potency and act, it's pure act. It's a lovely little summary that Woodbury did there. So, it is evident that God must have the same properties as every being. He's something, he's not nothing. He's one, he's not multiplied. He's true, he's good, he's beautiful. So these are the things we can conclude from the proofs. What we're talking about, don't forget, is the nature of God. D on page 109. I did forget to say that. Or we could look at it another way. If we go back now to page 109, this other diagram, which should have been put in second. A being whose essence is other than be, that's how we start out. We only have our existence. We're not identified with it, our be. We know that because, boy, when something's really wrong, we rush to a hospital or to a doctor. We know we can lose our existence. Although, what happens is we slough off the body if we die. And what is the essence of death? It's separation of soul and body. In other words, what's the convertible cause of death? What is death? What is it that without it, you can't have death? Or what is it that causes death? The potency of the body for many forms. The potency of the body to be other than human. If something killed us and ate us up, Fairy Twinkletoes here, supposing something gobbled her up, now she'd take on the form of lion. That's what happens. A potency for the body for many forms is why That's what death is, the convertible cause of death. In other words, what is it? That without it you can't have death. What's the very essence of death? It's there. So, a being whose essence is other than being. From that, we argue about composition, and then from composition, we argue to the simplicity of God. Then from being, whose essence is other than be, as I just explained, we can be without our essence is not without be. How do we know? Because we know we can die. We know what happens to other people. I witnessed two things that I've never forgotten as if they happened yesterday. A woman whose head was smashed off by a bus right in front of me. Then another occasion, a man whose two legs were chopped to pieces by a tram. And two men were struggling to try and hold the blood in his body. I rushed away, and young pharmacists at the time, and grabbed some cloths and rushed them out to them, and you never forget those things. Both, of course, died. I mean, shock would kill a man. So we know we can die. We've seen people die. We've attended funerals. So things whose essence is other than its be, like us. From that we know that there's imperfection in man. So we argued that there's a need for perfection, a goodness. And then we argued to subsistent be from that. And the same with the other. Limitation, we argued to infinity. In other words, non-limitation. Then from mutability, we argue to immutability. In other words, eternity. Then from plurality, we argue to unicity. And we'll see that in the text in a moment or two. So it is evident that God must have the same properties as every being, but how he has them is different. He's something, not nothing. He's one, not multiplied. He's good, true, he is good, he's beautiful. Like all human beings or all other beings. I have on a coffee table a rock amethyst from way up in Canada. Beautiful piece of petrology, if you like. And everybody that looks at it says, oh, isn't that beautiful? Everything's beautiful. Even the vilest creature you can find sometimes in men that are, when they've got to face the truth, find that they'll suddenly admit things. I've had a girl objected as teaching, can't think what it's called, la science de la gestion, business management sciences. And this smart aleck little pussycat sitting in front of me, and she said something to me one day which I thought was silly, an objection to something we were talking about. I said, that's not true, and you know it. She looked at me, she knew it. Then another big fellow, and another, because this was all French, all these people, he said something one day, I don't agree with what you just said. What did I say? I'm not sure, but you disagree. I say, you should laugh too, my dear. And I said, we said something else, and I said, that's not true, and you know it. And he admitted I was right. So deep down inside them, some people do know sometimes that they are facing real truths, or they're putting forward errors. So everything is in similar state is beautiful in some way or another. So there are two kinds of properties. And for Mr. Darby, I'm going to explain entitative properties, which he asked me to explain before. Entitative are the properties of something as it is a being. Operative properties is the properties of something as it is operative or does. One is how God does be, it flow from that, and the other from what God does do. So Frankie Sinatra and I believe in do, be, do. So, did I ever tell you about Frankie and Sydney? He did it to the wrong people. This was some years ago. I don't remember about. Was it in the 60s? Somewhere thereabouts. Get away from me, you hookers! Two reporters. female reporters. Get away from me, you hookers. Mr. Sinatra, do you just realise you call these ladies hookers? Yes, I did, he said, and smashed the camera out of the man's hand. What he didn't realise is somebody behind him had a camera on them too. The whole thing was on the screen that evening. Oh, he was very savage. So the Australian Council of Trade Unions put the word out. Mr. Sinatra is to be boycotted. So he's going to leave Australia. And where's the gas? I want some gas in my plane. Sorry, Mr. Sinatra, we've run out. Poor Frankie had to stay in Sydney and very humbly had to apologise to the Australian people. So he offered to put a concert on free of charge. You don't attack an Australian man's wife, ever, or their women. Please don't do it. The Australians are very easygoing people, but when they get their back up, they can fight. So, poor Frankie. When I got to Ottawa to start there in 1969, and the graduate students said to me, we'll never forgive the Australians. Why? What did we do? You let Blue Eyes come back. That's what you did. So, yes, deep down, he's beautiful too. So the entertainment properties, I've only dwelled upon a couple of them. We can't dwell upon them all. We go on forever. The simplicity, the perfection, the goodness, the infinity, the ubiquity, that is to say he's everywhere. Ubi in Latin means where, so he's whereness, everywhere. These pages stick together, they're very clannish. His immutability, his eternity, his unicity, and his transcendence. So, there are a number of explanations which are very beautiful here. But Austin Woodbury, Father Woodbury's explanation, based upon St. Thomas. St. Thomas clearly explains that there is utter simplicity in the very nature of God. In other words, it's non-composite. It's very easy to misunderstand that and think that, oh, there's nothing to him, it's just a simple blob of something somewhere. Infinitely simple. For as he explains, the procession of a word, in other words, the going forth of a word in the intellective life of God is not like the procession in the creatures. In other words, what comes out in the life of God, proceeds from him, isn't in the same manner as it is amongst creatures. St. Thomas, in quoting St. Augustine, explains so much more the details of this intimacy in relation to the divine nature. This is the passage now that I love. And one night, as I mentioned earlier, I gave a lecture on this. I had to fill in for Father Woodbury. He always kept me sort of in reserve to... I had a rather unusual job at the academy when I was teaching my own course, say philosophical psychology. I had to be prepared to step in and teach epistemology, metaphysics, something else for somebody else. And, he kept me in reserve because he was getting sick himself. I'd take over his theology classes, etc. So, in giving this one night, this old Christian brother came up to me after and he said, "Doctor, that's the clearest exposition of the Blessed Trinity I have ever heard." I said, "Well, it's not my explanation, brother." That says St. Thomas's. Anyway, here it is. St. Thomas speaks about what emanates or goes out from something. It increases or ascends a scale of intimacy. What proceeds from a rock? What proceeds from a plant? Now, what proceeds from acid? It'll corrode metal. Not me. And what proceeds from hot coffee? Is you put the spoon in, it goes right out from it. So what does the action and what receives the action are other and other. That's what he's saying there. That's from non-living. When we're teaching philosophical psychology, we say there are two kinds of actions. One whereby something moves something else. In other words, acid corrodes metal, hot coffee heats spoon. Another kind, and this is all the living substance now, these are proper living activities. Something does something for itself. The agent produces an action, but the patient suffers from it. That word patient, it's a beautiful word. It comes from the Latin word patior. If anybody has ever studied any Latin, you might remember the deponent verbs. They're passive in formation, but they're active in meaning. So this means, if you like, you can say, I be suffered. The patient is one who does the suffering. Now the past participle is passus. So we get the word patient here, we get the word passion here. It's the same word. A passion is something that somebody undergoes, like a patient undergoes an illness. So those words, the philosopher's very careful with those words, the formation of them. It pays to have some knowledge of the background, the etymology of the word. Excuse me, I'm frightened I knocked that over. So, but after the inanimate bodies, plants hold the next place, in which already the emanation proceeds from the interior. So emanation, what the plant does, comes from within the plant. And he goes on to say that the plant, although something goes out from the plant, it doesn't entirely rest within the plant. The plant does it for itself. The three powers of plant life, vegetative life: nutrition, growth, generation. The plant nutrifies itself, the plant grows itself, and the plant reproduces itself. And what in reproducing, it's paying attention, as it were instinctively, it's built into its nature, to produce similar to itself, its own species. If we take the seeds of poppies, we'll get poppies. We take the seeds of little doggies, we'll get little doggies. You never heard of a cat giving birth to a little puppy, have you? And I don't think you ever will. So plants, because although in them the emanation proceeds from the interior, nevertheless what emanates, what goes out from it, going out little by little from the interior, finally is found utterly extrinsic, or exterior if you like. Flower, fruit attached, fruit separated, then another plant. Also the first principle of this emanation is taken from the earth, wherefrom the plant takes nutriment, minerals, etc., from the earth and water. So there's the first difference from non-living things. Both plants, brutes, and man all have these three vegetative functions. But beyond the life of plants is found a higher degree of life. What he's leading up to is to show us how we can go, how far we can go to discover the divine emanations. Beyond the life of plants is found a higher degree of life, which is according to sensitive soul, whereof the proper emanation, although it begins from within, nevertheless is terminated in the interior. And how much the more emanation advances, so much the more at intervals does it arrive. For the exterior sensible imparts its form to the exterior senses, from which it proceeds into the imagination, and further into the treasury of the memory. When a dog, they have the higher brutes, sensitive souls, they have 5 external senses, or 6, depending which way you look at it. Touch can be divided sometimes into the sensation of say, resistance and non-resistance. And then the second mode of that is pain, etc. We don't know. It can be different ways, and sensation of hot and cold, all that sort of thing. That's not important. But what comes into the body, into the animal life, is first of all in the senses, then in the imagination. It's passed from one power to another within the thing. So still not perfect immanent activity. Immanent means it remains within. There are 3 words you mustn't confuse. In plus man, a plus man, Manere in Latin means to stay. Stay within, immanent. I can understand my understanding, that's immanent. I can think about my imagination, that's immanent, remaining within. Living activities are immanent activities. Now, eminent, oh, I'm sorry. What have I done here? Emin, eminent, sticking out. Min means to stick, sticking out. Now, imminent means sticking within. Something is imminent, it's about to happen. 3 different words. It's about to happen, or the word is stick. Sticking in this moment. Sticking out, he's a very eminent man. Remaining within. They mustn't be confused. How many times have I been corrected by a secretary typing up some notes for me when they thought they knew better? So, the sensitive soul, it can do a lot of things within, but still, not like man, he has an intellect and he can reflect over his own, he think about his thinkings. So that's the sensitive soul. So it's higher than the life of plants. According as the operation of this life is the more contained within intimates. It is not altogether perfect life, since the emanation always occurs from one to another. Therefore, that is the highest and perfect degree of life which is according to intellect. For intellect is reflected upon itself and can understand itself. But also in intellectual life, diverse degrees are found. I think we'll stop there and take a break. It'll be easier because we'll have to start a whole new section.
I don't have to, yeah.
Pardon?
So imagination applies to man, but not other animals.